Dead for Reals.
Hey, it's Chris O'Neill.
Adam Perry.
1973, we've already talked about some of the most essential masterpieces. The Wicker Man, Don't Look Now, The Exorcist. It was just a great year for cinema.
It was a great year overall, Chris. As we were just talking before, the show went on 1973. You had Aerosmith making their first record, Kiss putting on the makeup for the first time, Rush figuring their stuff out, and all these great movies to talk about today.
Some of them are cult films, some of them are horror films, but we just wanted to spotlight some of our favorites from 1973. You go first, Adam.
I wanted to do a little something different. I went with more of the mainstream of what happened during 1973. So obviously, we've talked Wicker Man, Don't Look Now, did talk Exorcist, huge, greatest of all time. But here's some of the hits that, some of them are kind of a little forgotten. So let's start with The Sting.
Oh, yeah. From Best Picture.
One Best Picture.
It was one of the top grossing films of 1973, too.
Yep. And this is Paul Newman and Robert Redford back after Butch and Sundance.
And their final collaboration.
Yes. And for the newer generation, Paul Newman and Redford, that's like the Rock and Kevin Hart type combination of back in the era.
Yeah.
He's taking these two superstars, putting them together and putting them through a series of movies, and trying to make money, and they made good money. So and
I love the first line that Paul Newman says to Robert Redford, because Paul Newman's wasted, throws him in the tub. Yeah. Nice to meet you, kid. You're a real horse's ass. I love that line. Anyway, go ahead. I'll let you talk about it.
A quick plot summary. You got The Sting from 1973. It was an American caper film set in September 1936, involving two complicated professional grifters, Paul Newman and Robert Redford, who they tried to calm a mob boss, played by the one and only Robert Shaw.
It's Lonigan.
Yes. Or for those, that is Quint from Jaws.
2 years before Jaws.
Two years before Jaws. And the film was directed by George Roy Hill. Just a classic.
Yeah.
Classic.
A mutual friend gets killed, and that's when they want to try to, outdo the mob boss there. And it's interesting. It's Robert Redford's only Academy Award nomination, believe it or not.
Wow. Yeah. That's incredible.
Only time he's ever been nominated for acting. I mean, he obviously won several years later when he unfortunately beat Scorsese out for Best Director. Raging Bull is a movie that everyone talks about. Not as many people talk about Ordinary People, but I digress. Go ahead.
But, again, the numbers speak for themselves. It was made on a budget of $5.5 million.
Yeah.
Made just about $160 million back. For 1973, that is that's
amazing.
like $500 million today in Avengers terms.
Right. Well, look at Godzilla -1, $15 million budget, and the movie's made over $100 million.
Incredible. It's one of those movies. It's a classic. I mean, there's not much you can really say to it other than just give it the credit it's due.
So what made you like that movie so much? Was it just the camaraderie of the two actors, or was it just the story?
I love Paul Newman. I'm not so much of a Redford fan as I am Paul Newman. I love The Hustler, Color of Money, and stuff like that.
This is a Scorsese movie right there, Color of Money.
I love that movie. Clapton, great song. Anyway, slap shot. So it's just a fun to me. It was just a fun throwback.
Yeah, and it brought ragtime music back. And not only that, it was just. It's unfortunate because they tried to work together again. Robert Redford, Paul Newman really tried hard to work together, and it just unfortunately never happened, which is a shame. Yeah, because they made a really good team. Yeah,
and again, it was one of those acting duos. Like I said, if you want to compare it to modern, yet The Rock and Kevin Hart, Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg. A little earlier than that, Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder. So they kind of had that tag team going, and it made them a lot of money.
You could call it a triangle because both Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting were directed by George Roy Hill. Too,
sure.
So
yeah.
What a trifecta, I guess.
Yes, right.
So since you were talking about American films, I've got to bring up the movie that really, really changed independent film. Because I know Richard Linklater was heavily influenced when he made Dazed and Confused. We're talking about Mean Streets, Martin Scorsese's huge breakthrough. The guy directed a couple of movies, and, you know, John Cassavetes, Roger Corman were both his mentors, and they both looked at Boxcar Bertha, the movie he made prior, and Cassavetes literally said, "You took a whole year and made this crap." I'm kind of paraphrasing, but, you know, it kind of made him think about it, you know, because he wanted to really make some good cinema. Along comes Mean Streets. It's a crime film. You know, Scorsese is noted for making crime pictures, but it's a very independent movie. Yes, Warner Brothers distributed it, but he actually, you know, it takes place in New York City, but he had to go over to L.A. and film some of the scenes. And what was amazing is, you know, this is the movie that also broke Robert De Niro.
Yep.
So Robert De Niro, Martin Scorsese, their first of 10 collaborations together, and it just marked an era for something new. Just imagine going back in the theaters in 1973 and seeing Mean Streets. No one had ever seen anything like it before. I know he was partially influenced by I Vitalioni. That was a Federico Fellini movie that was made 20 years prior, and he was influenced by, like, the group, the dynamics of the Friends. And I mean, this movie was influenced Hong Kong cinema, which is interesting. Wong Kar-wai made his film debut, and a lot of the plot was borrowed from Mean Streets. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Richard Linklater, anyone who is really into independent film, Martin Scorsese just changed the course of independent film. Of course, he would never admit to that because he's always very humble in his stuff. But I highly recommend it. I mean, if you love crime dramas, you know, Scorsese was just getting into his own. Some people say that, oh, it's this or that. But now, I mean, that's the thing. When that movie came out, it flopped.
Sure.
It wasn't like a huge box office success. It did, you know, it's $650,000 budget. It did make $3 million, but it wasn't like, it didn't really like break the barrier as far as the box office. But it was heavily influential. And what we've learned about Martin Scorsese movies, they don't necessarily perform the best at the box office. There's only like a couple of exceptions, Cape Fear and Wolf of Wall Street. But his films like age better. Like Mean Streets, you know, it kind of took critics by surprise. It did get a lot of praise. It won a few critics awards, but it was mixed. You know, and now it's considered one of the greatest films ever made. Same case happened with Taxi Driver.
Right.
Same thing with Raging Bull. And I think the same thing is going to happen with Killers of the Flower Moon. People are just like, oh, this and that and this and that. But give it 20, 30 years and people will be like, wow, that's one of the greatest films ever made.
You know, it's kind of like the theme with Scorsese.
It is. For me, it is. Some people would disagree, and that's okay. I mean, everyone sees art differently.
Right.
But I watch his films and I keep watching them over and over and over and over and over again. It drives my wife completely nuts. But Mean Streets, you know, and they just re-released it in this beautiful 4K restoration. The Criterion Collection just did an amazing job. He supervised it. Him and Thelma Schoonmaker, his editor, who actually didn't even edit this movie.
Oh, wow.
Her first time with him was Raging Bull, but even though they kind of co-edited the Woodstock movie together.
Nice.
So Mean Streets it came out in 1973 along with other amazing films, and it paved the way for independent cinema as we know it today.
So talking about paving the way, so before there was Indiana Jones, before there was Star Wars, there was American Graffiti.
My personal favorite Lucas film.
George Lucas, you know, Happy Days, the movie.
Much better than Happy Days. Oh my gosh. Talk about the ultimate coming of age teen film right there. That's that's the one, in my opinion, that you hold all the others against. You can't top it, in my opinion, but go ahead.
So American Graffiti, this is the debut of George Lucas, produced by Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah.
And listen to this cast list. Richard Dreyfuss, Ron Howard, Paul Giamatti, Harrison Ford in his first film.
Right.
Mackenzie Phillips, Bo Hopkins, Wolfman Jack.
Yeah, the late great Wolfman Jack.
I mean, Chris, you're a radio guy.
Yeah, I know.
Wolfman Jack.
The late great Suzanne Summers.
Yes. It's sets in California in 1962. It's a study of cruising in the early rock and roll culture.
Right.
And Lucas's age group, and just, kids living,
Right.
back in the dawn of, this fad called loud rock and roll.
Right.
It's another iconic movie.
Oh, yeah.
And
The soundtrack, too.
the sound is incredible. But another one, $77,000 to make. It made over $140 million.
Yeah.
I mean, it just got beat out by The Sting in the Academy Awards for
Right.
Best Picture.
Right.
I mean, what a debut by George Lucas.
No, it was his second or third movie, actually, because he did THX 1138, a sci-fi movie with Duvall.
Okay, but this was like
This was his breakthrough, just like Scorsese.
Yes, yeah.
His major breakthrough, where he actually announced his arrival and he actually found his stride. Him and Lucas and Scorsese, who happen to be best of friends, both found their stride in this in 1973.
As I'm reading through my notes now, I'm seeing this is the first film that he produced under the
Lucasfilms Limited, whatever they call it. Yes,
like The Sting. I mean, this is one of those classics that you probably should have watched. If you haven't, go watch it.
Oh, it's essential. And unfortunately, the 4K they just released of that, I've heard a lot of mixed reviews on the coloring. I'm happy with the Blu-ray that I have. It's just an amazing film. If you love coming of age comedies, this is the one that paved the way for contemporary coming of age teen comedies. It's just amazing.
Yeah. What's next for you?
Well, since we're talking about American Graffiti,
Yep.
the co-writers of American Graffiti, Willard Hysick, I think that's how you say his name, Willard Hysick, and his wife Gloria Katz, they co-wrote American Graffiti. And around that time, it technically got a major release in 1974, but it kind of made a few limited releases in 1973. Messiah of Evil. Now, a supernatural horror film from the co-writers of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, American Graffiti. You wouldn't think that would make for an interesting supernatural film. I don't know what happened to this film. I just discovered it, within the past couple of years. I mean, the plot, a woman travels to a remote coastal town in California to find her missing father. And when she arrives, she finds herself in the midst of a series of bizarre incidents. That's the plot. And that's a cool thing. Like The Birds, like The Shining, it doesn't explain why things are the way they are. They're just the way they are. And I love it. I mean, Mariana Hill is the only real known name. You had a couple of character actors from the 40s and 50s. Royal Dano, who was like the second baddie, the secondary baddie in the Westerns.
Yep.
And Elijah Cook Jr., the secondary baddie, usually in film noirs. Most notably, The Maltese Falcon, The Killing, another Kubrick movie. Other than that, really not a known cast. I mean, the budget was less than $1 million. They don't really say how much this is grossed. I mean, again, this movie kind of came and went. A major theatrical release in late 1974. And it's kind of interesting re-released names. Dead People, Night of the Damned, Return of the Living Dead. This is not the Return of the Living Dead in the mid-'80s.
Yeah.
Also, Revenge of the Screaming Dead. Huh. Yeah, the directors, I almost forgot that they would help direct Howard the Duck, which, we'll forget about that. But it's interesting that you probably haven't heard of Messiah of Evil, have you?
Not really, no.
It's just, I don't know how this movie got forgotten. It's one of those movies where has this movie been all my life? I know his wife, Katz, said it was a real bow wow, although she later, Hysick claimed it appeared on a marquee in a Woody Allen film, and then some reviewer called it one of the top 10 classic overlooked horror films of all time. And others have noted the film seems to be neglected, surreal horror, It has some critics have said it has a convoluted narrative and a peculiar atmosphere, and I think that was the whole idea. The zombie-like creatures are killing all these people, and it's never explained why. You don't even know if they're zombies.
Yeah,
that's the interesting thing. She just happens to be there looking for her missing father, and it's just a lot of people just starting to talk about it over the years, and it's got like a cult following, and I hope it continues to have a cult following as Radiance Films just released this amazing Blu-ray. It has all these special features. I mean, it's given the deluxe treatment like American Graffiti and The Sting. Yeah. I love it that these little scene films are now getting the spotlight. And I know some of them, all these critics have just said it's just so neglected and it's so sad to see. But I am glad that I finally was able to catch it. And it's a solid 4.5 star film for me. It was just a lot of unforgettable images. And I mean, I know you love horror films.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know how you feel about unexplained, ambiguous plot lines, but it's a hit or miss for some people.
Right.
I know my wife hates ambiguous films, but to me, it was a lot like The Birds. These things are happening. We don't know why. They just are. And you kind of have to try to survive it.
I would watch it without seeing it. I can't really say if it would be my cup of tea or not. I'm usually lean more towards a story-driven. I love The Birds, but open-ended ending kind of is frustrating.
The book is nothing like it, and we'll talk about The Birds at some other point. But it's all of these great films owe a lot to Hitchcock. It's a movie that has found its legacy now, which is great. 50 years later, we can now say, in my opinion, Messiah of Evil is one of the greatest horror films, supernatural films I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of them, not as much as you. I was just blown away by Messiah of Evil, and I still having a hard time wrapping my head. It just shows how talented that husband-wife team was, writing American Graffiti, co-writing American Graffiti, and then going on to do Howard the Duck and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That's incredible.
Crap. Yeah. Next one, I actually watched this last night.
Oh, yeah?
I rewatched it. I forgot how fun it is. The Three Musketeers, also known as The Three Musketeers, Queen's Diamond, 1973. I'm a sucker for classic literature. I love The Three Musketeers, I'll admit, and probably to many, many laughs. My favorite version is the one I grew up with, which is the 1993 Disney version of The Three Musketeers, starring Kiefer Sutherland, Charlie Sheen, Oliver Platt, and Chris O'Donnell. But if you haven't watched it recently, that's a fantastic movie. But this one in 1973 is actually the most closely based on the actual novel itself, with a lot of humor interjected into it, which makes it a lot of fun. But it's old school swashbuckling swordplay and fights.
In a more interesting cast, I might add.
Yeah, I'll get to the cast because, again, we got a killer cast here. I have to, being a huge Beatles fan that I am, I have to point out the director, Mr. Richard Lester, who gave us two of my other all-time favorite movies, A Hard Day's Night and Help, starring the Beatles. Incredible, fun, awesome, incredible movies. So he directs this movie. And yes, let's get into the cast. So your three main musketeers are played by Michael York, Oliver Reed, and Frank Finlay.
Oh, Frank Finlay is such an underrated actor.
Richard Chamberlain rounds it out. Supporting that is the beautiful, I think she just passed, Raquel Welch.
Raquel Welch.
Yes. Excuse me.
Beautiful is an understatement.
Yes, exactly. Geraldine Chaplin.
Charlie's daughter.
John Pierre Castle. Charlton Heston.
Yes.
Faye Dunaway. And someone we've talked quite a bit about on the show, Mr. Christopher Lee.
One of the most versatile actors right there.
He was fantastic in this movie.
But talk about a change of pace for Charlton Heston.
Sure.
Because this guy played Moses.
Yes.
He played Ben-Hur.
Yeah.
And now he's playing not so nice guy.
No, not at all.
I'm just kind of mildly putting it. He's not that nice of a guy.
Yeah. And Christopher Lee playing the Cardinals henchman, the one.
Right.
The name forgets me. But I mean, what an awesome performance. His fight with D'Artagnan,
yes,
in the forest by lantern light, and they can't find each other, was just, I mean, it was campy, but it was an interesting take on a sword fight. I really enjoyed it. And this movie's made for $4.5 million. It makes $10 million, so it makes its money back and then some.
Right.
Like I said, it adheres to the novel, and for all you people out there who are classic literature junkies like me, The Three Musketeers, it doesn't get any more classic than that. They did film a sequel simultaneously.
Yeah.
The Four Musketeers didn't do as well, but still fun in its own respect. But
right.
So yeah, check it out. Three Musketeers, 1973.
Well, since we're on the subject of American films, we're going to switch gears. This one came out, it was almost summertime. It was in May of 73. Mm-hmm. This is what they call blaxploitation films.
All right.
Have you heard about those?
Oh, yes.
All right. So this didn't redefine the genre. It didn't start the genre, which, was started by Melvin Van Peebles and Gordon Parks, with sweet ass bad back. I'm going to butcher it. Which was started by Melvin Van Peebles and Gordon Parks, of course, Shaft. But
yep.
Coffee, Pam Grier, Jack Hill. You got this is the first of the two vigilante films I'm going to bring up in 1973. And Pam Grier, she became an icon because of this movie. Of course, young Tarantino saw this movie in the theaters, became mesmerized by her, and later cast her as Jackie Brown and kind of gave her a late career boost. But yeah, $500,000, made $4 million. This was the third Jack Hill film to have Pam Grier. A Big Dollhouse, The Big Birdcage. Those were fine, but Coffee is the one that became so iconic. For some reason, this movie it boosted her career. She was like the head, hero of blaxploitation, and I love how Jennifer Lawrence erroneously pointed out that she was the first major female hero, but 30 years before Pam Grier with Coffee. Yeah. Everyone okay, you got Sigourney Weaver and Alien, but before Sigourney Weaver, you have Pam Grier, Coffee. I love how I love the tagline. They call her Coffee, and she'll cream you. And so that part's cheesy. This is obviously a B movie, but Pam Grier can just enter a room, just like Christopher Lee, just like Boris Karloff. She just has that aura, that screen presence, and of course, a lot of guys found her very appealing.
Yeah,
she was a gorgeous woman, but man, oh man, she had the charisma to back it up and the screen presence. She did some of her own singing in some of the movies too, but this one, it just, for some reason, it stood out. It wasn't a great movie. I would never give this movie 5 stars, but I've watched it so many times. It's just a lot of fun to watch. And you got also notably, all right, Sid Haig.
Wow.
The late, great Sid Haig.
Legend.
He plays a not so nice guy in this movie too.
He didn't play many nice guys.
No. He's like the henchman, but again, he stands out. But it's Pam Grier, and it's the ultimate revenge movie. It's very predictable.
Right. It's
got that B movie feel to it. And yes, I know it's been restored beautifully in Blu-ray. I know Arrow Video had a hand in that, but it doesn't matter. This is a movie that begs to be seen if you haven't seen it.
I'll tell you a quick story about Sid Haig. He was the nicest man in the world.
He seemed like that's what everyone loved, working with the guy.
I don't know how familiar you are with conventions.
Yeah.
I do. I went to one out by Syracuse called Scaricon, and he was one of the headliners there. So everybody wanted to see Sid. Everybody I'm not the biggest fan, so it was kind of take or leave for me. But this guy walked by me with his entourage. All right, I just made the slightest eye contact with him, and he put his hand out and shook my hand and asked me if I was having a good time. Other celebrities like Tara Reid, Tom Atkins, their noses are up in the air until they're behind their desks. and or their tables, and
Yeah, he didn't have to do that.
He didn't have to do that. He was having a good time and making sure everybody at this event was having a ball. And it was just a quick, hey, man, how you doing? I'm here for you. We're here to have a good time.
Right.
No charge. Just and it was the nicest thing I'd ever seen a celebrity do.
Yeah, he's everyone praised him, and Rob Zombie saw something in him too. He was a big fan of him. Rob Zombie watched movies like Coffee, saw him, and definitely, he gave him probably his most memorable performances.
Yeah, I think his first movie was Spider Baby or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, maybe a movie we and I should check out down the road, because it was one of Lon Chaney Jr.'s last.
Yes.
So, that would be a really fun movie to check out.
That was in the 60s, yeah.
Yeah. It was his first and one of Lon Chaney's last. So we'll tag that for later on. But
yeah, so Coffee, Pam Grier, it was such an iconic role for her. Again, not going to win any awards, but man, oh man, it's so much fun to watch.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Next one I'm going to do is something we actually touched on in one of our very first episodes. 1973, the George A. Romero, The Crazies. It is a cult classic today, but it was not a hit in 1973.
And unfortunately for Romero, he had a lot of duds in between the Living Dead movies.
Yes. So much not a hit that this movie was made for $275,000 and it only made $143,000 back.
Oof.
So yeah, this was a flop by all standards. It's quick recap of what we've already talked about. It's basically about a small town in Pennsylvania. They're affected by a military biological weapon, and everybody basically turns into zombies and starts killing everybody. What you would expect from Mr. Romero.
So what was it about this movie that just stood out to you?
I liked the biological weapon twist on it.
But a lot of filmmakers use that as a means for their zombies in future movies. It's interesting.
Right.
The movie wasn't a success, but yet
inspired
people kind of copied.
Inspired a lot.
There was a lot of copycats after that.
I liked how they explained the infection. Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the... It's just happening.
Yeah, which I like. I like that.
There's a charm to it, but when you've seen all those movies and it's just happening, to get a little explanation for once is cool.
Yeah.
You know why this is happening.
But one wonders if Romero hadn't made this movie, would there have been 28 Days Later?
Exactly. Again, it's one of those movies that over time it's found its audience. It's a bona fide cult classic now.
Oh yeah.
It was not a hit back in the day, but it is inspired, and we have a lot of movies, especially in the zombie genre, to thank for.
Yeah.
You can even the non-zombie movies like Outbreak.
Right.
You can attest to being inspired by this movie.
Oh, of course.
So.
Yeah,
my next one, The Crazies.
Yeah, even Planet Terror, Robert Rodriguez, you can definitely see some of Romero. Romero is the zombie genre. He created it, literally. Yes. There were movies that had the title zombie in it, but Zombies as we know it was created by George Romero, and no one else has done a zombie movie like him since.
Yeah, and we talked about it when we were doing Dawn of the Dead. The zombies before him was voodoo, which is my next movie we're going to get into a little bit, but I'll let you go next.
Well, hey, you enticed me with the voodoo. Keep talking.
All right. So, I kind of kept my first pick short because these next two movies, I really want to get into a good conversation with you, Chris.
Okay.
So my next movie is one of my all-time favorites, and it's in the world of 007. Live and Let Die, 1973. It's not my favorite Bond movie, but it's probably, second or third.
It was one of the first novels by Ian Fleming.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
What got me hooked on it, obviously being a big music guy, Mr. Sir Paul McCartney and Linda McCartney penning the awesome title song "Live and Let Die," produced by George Martin. That kind of got me, raised my eyebrows to it. And then I saw the movie itself, and it's the debut of George. Wow.
George of the Jungle?
Not George of the Jungle. Roger Moore is the title, our James Bond. I know he's a lot of people's favorite James Bond, not mine in particular, but he was good. He was really, really good. And I really, really like this story of Bond going to Louisiana and fighting voodoo, the Baron Samedi. And it was campy, but it was still just a lot of fun. Like James Bond's movie should be.
Well, the only thing, in my opinion, that you said was good out of any of that was George Martin.
Oh, jeez. You even like the song?
Nah, never was a huge Paul McCartney fan. Once he left the Beatles, I don't know. I just never really cared for his music after the Beatles. And George Martin, though, the guy was an amazing producer. But because my father introduced me to the Bond movies. The first ones I watched were the Connery ones.
Right.
And then I read some of the books that my father had. And then I watched some of the Roger Moore movies, and my least favorite Bond. That's just my opinion.
No, honestly, I mean, if we're talking about favorites here, my favorite movie is GoldenEye. I love, and I think Pierce Brosnan was the best.
Well, the interesting thing about Pierce Brosnan is he had a little bit of Moore and a little bit of Connery.
Yes. Yeah.
But the guy who captured the personality of Bond the best was Daniel Craig, in my opinion. But the physique and some of the emotions, Connery. Because Connery had like the height, the build of James Bond, like it's described in the books.
Right.
Connery looked the part. Daniel Craig acted the part because Bond wasn't tongue-in-cheek, really. He was intense in the books, and Daniel Craig captured that intensity. Daniel Craig's very intense as James Bond. Yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't jive with the humoristic take on Bond that a lot of people loved. Roger Moore he's a very charismatic guy. I'm not going to take that away from him, but in my opinion, he didn't fit Bond. I know they wanted Cary Grant, who would have done a similar thing with Bond.
Right.
I didn't jive with him at all as Bond. They had Man with a Golden Gun, which in the book, he almost dies. James Bond almost gets killed.
Right.
And none of that is seen. No one's opinions are wrong, but I just didn't like Roger Moore as James Bond. He was good as a Saint, perfect for the Saint, just all wrong, in my opinion, for James Bond.
The thing is, when I watch James Bond movies, I watch them, and I'll often say with the superhero genre, and especially like our slasher genre here in horror,
right?
What I love about the James Bond movie, except for when we got to the Daniel Craig, like when we got to Daniel Craig, we made movies that were sequels to each other. Prior to, you just made a Bond movie. You had your Connery era, your Moore era, your Timothy Dalton era, your Brosnan era, but each of those movies can stand on their own.
Well, kind of.
To a point. They're their own individual story, essentially. I mean, there's some linkage between some of them, like with Blofeld and the Connery Moonraker and Spy Who Loved Me with Roger Moore. I love that about the Bond movies, that you can just watch any of them at any time. So, and Live and Let Die is, to me, the best Roger Moore effort in all of them. I mean, I do like Spy Who Loved Me a lot. Moonraker was the very first Bond movie I saw. And then I saw GoldenEye, and GoldenEye just changed my opinion on everything.
See, maybe if I saw the Roger Moore movies first, I might have felt differently. Goldfinger was my introduction to Bond.
I mean, come on,
boom,
Goldfinger. Yeah.
And then I saw Dr. No, and then From Russia with Love, Robert Shaw. That fight sequence on the train, I'm willing to bet that made Alfred Hitchcock jealous because he loved trains too, and that was so intense. Because we saw earlier in this movie how this guy's like indestructible, and Bond has a workout. He literally has a workout with
I mean, you only live twice. I mean,
I didn't care for that one as much. I liked the first.
Donald Pleasant's the best Bond villain ever.
Well, he was the most memorable part of that movie. But I think the first three Bond movies are the best: Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger. And Thunderball started getting a little but it was still entertaining. The underwater fight sequences are amazing. Right. But then after Thunderball, I really didn't like any of the other Sean Connery movies. You Only Live Twice, a major step up from Diamonds Are Forever.
Sure.
But the first 3 Bond movies are the best. That's just my opinion. See, I love Daniel Craig's personality. Him and Connery are kind of tied as my favorite Bonds. But Daniel Craig's movies, other than Skyfall, Casino Royale, I love the ending to Quantum of Solace. To me, I like that. But the other Bond movies are just... this last Bond movie was one of the worst I've ever seen.
But that's
anyway.
the thing, like, I loved Skyfall. And Skyfall, to me, of all the Craig movies,
is the best.
Felt like a Bond movie. I understand where you got that serious Bond, but at the same time, it brought back all the tropes from the movies that came before it, which is why I loved it so much.
It was well written. The 2 best written Bond movies are on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yep.
And Skyfall. A lot of people like dump on George Lazenby, which I can kind of understand. In my opinion, the best written Bond film. And Telly Savalas was pretty kick-ass as Blofeld too.
yeah. Back to Live and Let Die.
Yes.
A budget of $7 million. It makes $61 million. I mean, like, it's a bona fide hit. I mean, it's 007. It's fun. I pick these movies just because they're just fun movies to watch. And again, to me, the best part about Bond movies is, you can literally pick anyone you want and watch it whenever you want and not have to really know what's going on. I make that argument all the time. Like, if you're gonna make another Halloween movie, throw away the damn storylines, the family storyline, and just make a Halloween movie. From here on out, like in Batman too. How many times do we need to see Batman's origin? Stop.
Leave Christopher Nolan's the way it is, and then change the rest.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, even when they try to change the rest, they're it's like, well, before we go anywhere else, we got to tell everybody yet again for the 1,000th time how Batman became Batman or how Superman became Superman. Just write a Superman story that you like and make it. And I'll tell you what, it'll make millions of dollars.
If you do it right.
Treat your audience a little smart, like the Bond movies did. Everybody knew who James Bond was. No one needed to know how he got into MI6 or anything like that. We established this in Dr. No. Yeah. And you just made the movies.
Right.
And they were fun to watch.
Right. Agree to disagree on that one. Because I like a handful of Bond movies and then that's it. But moving on, we're going to go explore some foreign cinema here.
Alrighty.
We talked about it. Well, I talked about it during the Frankenstein episode. Spirit of the Beehive. This is a Spanish drama. Victor Ariz. It was his first movie. And he wouldn't make another movie until a decade later. He's only made a handful of movies. This young girl and her fascination with Frankenstein. I don't know if you remember me talking about this.
Yes, I do remember you talking about that.
It explores her family life and schooling, but she just becomes so fascinated and obsessed with the Frankenstein monster. There's a lot of symbolism here. There was a lot of censorship going around in Spain. Franco... It was during his regime, and it manages to do a whole symbolic portrayal of life under Franco's rule. And while the censors were alarmed by some of the film's suggestive content, like Romero, a lot of suggestive stuff.
Yeah.
Suggestive stuff about the authoritarian regime. They allowed it to be released in Spain based on its success abroad and the assumption that most of the public would have no real interest in seeing a slow-paced, thinly plotted, arty picture. That was the quotations there. It's been called a bewitching portrait of a child's haunted inner life. The symbolism, we'll get into it a little bit. There's a lot of disintegration of the family. Mm-hmm. They're all doing their own things. The wife, the father, the mom, they're kind of off doing their own thing. They allude that the mom's having an affair. She finds some love letters, later burns them in the film. But it's a family's emotional life. It's the disintegration of the emotions around it, mainly because this whole story kind of takes place during the Spanish Civil War, and they kind of dance around it. Again, they don't come out and say it. They weren't allowed to. But the beehive, a lot of people say the symbolism not only for the audience, but also for the father in the film. The beehive symbolizes the same thing for both parties, the inhumanity of fascist Spain. Again, if you don't know the context, you know they're not doing well, the family. They're kind of just, again, going through the motions. But there's a lot of stuff that involves the Civil War. There's all these barren, empty landscapes, representing the isolation during that time. And in the film, the father describes his revulsion at the mindless activity of the beehive, which is an allusion to the Francoism, how humanity is suffering under it. So yeah, the symbolism, the production, it's interesting. They were worried that they could not reach the completion. In a prior version of the story, which originally set in the period of the 1970s, a grown-up Anna's father is ill. She returns to her village to reunite with him, thinking that this version would tidy things up, but he changed the whole ending to it. He kind of left it ambiguous. Again,
Yeah.
I know not everyone loves the ambiguous endings, but I love it. To me, that would have just kind of ruined everything up until that point where she goes back to her terminally ill father and everything like that. It's just one of those amazing films. Again, it's a quiet movie. There's no outlandish dramatic scene. It's, again, all beneath the surface. You know, there's a lot of subtleties of the film. And I know Criterion did an amazing job. There's a huge making of, which is very fascinating. It's like a documentary that was made. It revisits some of the locations and everything like that. I highly recommend Spirit of the Beehive. Again, if you're looking for to be more adventurous in your your tastes, you want to broaden your horizons, Spirit of the Beehive, a nice, subtle film, which has a lot of bubbling below the surface, and I think you'll be able to see it upon multiple viewings, but I highly recommend Spirit of the Beehive.
For my final pick on this show is actually probably one of the movies that's most important to me. I have practiced martial arts off and on my entire life.
Oh, really?
And yes, I've practiced in Hapkido, Taekwondo, Wing Chun, combat Hapkido, American-style karate. So I've done quite a bit. So obviously we're going with the greatest martial arts movie of all time, Enter the Dragon.
It's up there for me.
It's such an important movie to the martial arts community. This was Bruce Lee at his absolute best. I know this is an important movie to you too, Chris. You know, before I get into it, your thoughts on Enter the Dragon.
Enter the Dragon is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
But it's not my favorite martial arts films. I've explored a lot of the Shaw Brothers, and of course Sonny Chiba. To me, Sonny Chiba rivals Bruce Lee in a lot of ways. We'll get into that discussion some other time, but there's no doubt in my mind that Kung Fu was starting to get popular before Bruce Lee. It was starting to. The Shaw Brothers was breaking through. You know, Chinese Boxer came before Fist of Fury, similar plot line. But there was just something magnetic about Bruce Lee. And to talk about an unfortunate circumstance, this was his last movie. And they could have easily set up a Mission Impossible, James Bond franchise with this character. Because he's a spy. You don't know what he's a spy of. And I love, you're just thrown in there like James Bond. You don't know anything about his training. You know he trains people. You know he is a spy, but that's it. That's it. That's all you need to know. And John Saxon's cool, and there's a few other cool...
I mean, again, so, you know, obviously, you know, the cast is starred by Bruce Lee, but yes, we have the legendary John Saxon in there. We have and just martial arts greats, Bob Wall and Jim Kelly. I mean, like, these are very important people in the martial arts world, and
they're all champions at some point. That's the thing. These characters, these actors in Bruce Lee movies, most of them are a champion of some sort of martial art.
You know, it's distributed by Golden Harvest and Warner Brothers, so it's a dual Chinese and American production. They make this movie for $850,000. It makes back $400 million.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Bruce Lee died, so that made it even bigger. The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger, it made The Dark Knight a bigger movie, just like in this one, Bruce Lee's unfortunate death.
Well, and again, talking about from the martial arts aspect of this movie, Bruce in his previous movies, Fists of Fury, The Big Boss, Way of the Dragon, like he had, he did choreograph all the fights. This was like his movie to really show his philosophies on martial arts.
Yeah,
for the first time to an American audience.
You could unofficially say this was his second directorial effort because he pretty much directed most of the movie.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
For those of you who don't know much, Bruce Lee created a style. I hate calling it a style because if you read his book Tao of Jeet Kune Do, that's the name of the style, Jeet Kune Do. It's not really a style per se, even though nowadays you can go to a quote-unquote Jeet Kune Do school. But if you read his writings and philosophies, Jeet Kune Do wasn't supposed to be a style. Jeet Kune Do was supposed to be you take what works from every style and use what you can.
Right.
The short and sweet of what the Jeet Kune Do is supposed to be, the way of intercepting fist. Basically what his book says, if someone's coming at you and you can take them out with a low side kick to the knee, take them out with a no side kick to the knee. If someone's coming at you and it's easier for you to take them down like a wrestler, take them down like a wrestler.
Right.
If a guy's coming at you and it's do a quick jab like in boxing, do a quick jab like in boxing. Don't limit yourself to a horse stance and straight punch that you would find in like traditional karate. Or falling back into a back stance and throwing a high roundhouse kick to the head.
Yeah, it was a new way of defending yourself.
And it got him a lot of flack from the martial arts community, the traditional arts. He really had to defend himself, and Enter the Dragon was his really first way of introducing that to the public on a major scale. Like the scene with the guy on the boat. And he's having his way with all the other Chinese fighters, and he throws a punch at Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee doesn't flinch. And the guy asks him, "What's his style?" And Bruce Lee says, "You can call my style the style of fighting without fighting." And again, this is Bruce implying his Jeet Kune Do philosophy, where he doesn't even throw a punch; he puts this guy in a dinghy and then lets him adrift and says, "Hey, you try to come back on this boat, we're going to let the rope go." It was just, and again, funny moment for maybe a casual viewer, but someone who has practiced martial arts, that's a brilliant move.
Well, talk about brilliant moves. John Saxon shows a brilliant move later that's kind of similar. He punches him right in the nuts.
Bolo, yes. And again, the Bruce's fight choreography is just absolutely stunning and brilliant. It's beautiful to watch his movements. The guy was a freak of nature, physically, mentally. It's just such an awesome movie.
And there's a couple of future martial arts stars. Jackie Chan,
he's one of the henchmen. You can barely see him, but he does get taken out by Bruce Lee for half a second. Again, we just saw about Bolo. He would go on to have a huge success. He would actually fight his son in the movie Legacy of Rage about a decade later. And then where we most know him from is Bloodsport with Jean-Claude Van Damme. And
throwing barrels and double impact.
Yeah.
But there's even another guy behind the scenes that helped out with the action choreography, Sammo Hung.
Yes. Yep.
He did a lot of stuff behind the scenes.
He worked with Bruce Lee a lot when he did his Chinese movies.
Yes.
Again, consider myself a martial artist and practice in martial art. There's no one more important than Bruce Lee. And this movie, it really showed him at his absolute best. And the greatest thing about Bruce Lee is he could do those moves that dazzled you and made you like, wow, did he really do that? The guy was so fast and he was so agile, but he also made sure that anything he did, he took the time to teach you something.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Like him and Chuck Norris taught each other a lot of different things. he would learn just as much as he taught, which shows his humbleness as well.
And then, you know, and again, that's the, you know, and we can get to a Way of the Dragon show of the beautiful fight between Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee. And eventually, you know, because there was, in his philosophy of Jeet Kune Do, you know, high kicks were useless.
Right.
You know, because, I mean, are you really, you know, going to hit someone with a high kick in a fight? It's just, Bruce Lee at first saw it as unreasonable. And then old Chuck Norris, a black belt in Tang Soo Do, which is a sister art to Taekwondo,
right,
showed him that, well, no, these head kicks can be devastating if applied properly. So Bruce Lee adapted and, you know, added it to his philosophy.
Right.
And his way of thinking. And again, that was the brilliance of Bruce Lee, always willing to learn. I mean, Brandon Lee described Jeet Kune Do in an interview once, and this is why I hate calling it a style. It's different for everybody. For Brandon Lee, his Jeet Kune Do was a base of Wing Chun and Muay Thai kickboxing.
Yeah.
His father was Wing Chun, American boxing, fencing. That's where, like, all of his very quick, you know,
right,
attacking straight in moves came from, was fencing.
Right.
You know, and then he added like the American karate and Southern kung fu and stuff like that. I could go on for hours.
That's why even Sonny Chiba, you know, it had an interview because Sonny Chiba literally broke through. I mean, he had been in movies for a decade, but Street Fighter came out literally in 1974, right?
Yeah.
January of 74. And we will be doing a whole show about Street Fighter and the iconic Sonny Chiba. He even said, I wish I could have worked with Bruce Lee.
Yeah, and again, not only does you know the Street Fighter come after it, but the whole martial arts genre is.
Well, they call it Bruce exploitation or something like that.
Yeah,
the copycat movies, they literally
everywhere
hire guys that looked kind of like Bruce Lee, and it'd be Bruce Lee L.E. or L.I. But and they'd have all these copycat movies, and they'd call it like a Bruce Lee movie.
Yeah. And another important thing you need to take away from this movie is Bruce becomes the first martial arts superstar in America. Now, over in China and Japan, that's a totally different story with those movies. But in America, Bruce Lee becomes this first martial arts icon action hero.
Superstar, yes. Because Jimmy Wang Yu actually got famous in America a little bit before, but he never reached superstardom like Bruce Lee. And
I'll tell you, I'll on my deathbed, you don't get a Jean-Claude Van Damme, a Steven Seagal, a John Statham. You don't get any of that without this movie, Enter the Dragon.
Right.
It just doesn't happen. The popularity of martial arts and martial arts movie just goes through the stratosphere after Enter the Dragon comes out, and it creates this whole new world of martial arts movies, which I know you love, I love, and it's just such an important movie. It's an important movie to me, and it's, it's Bruce Lee's finest piece of work. Unfortunately, as you alluded to, he dies right before the premiere of the movie, as he's in the middle of making his final movie, Game of Death, which probably could have topped that.
And unfortunately he only made like 40 minutes worth. But I do want to give a plug to some physical media. If you love Bruce Lee as much as Adam does, Arrow Video. Now, I have the Criterion set, which was released a few years before, which is amazing in itself, all of his big movies. But the Arrow set, to me, tops it because they have like a different version of the Big Boss. They still don't have the infamous chainsaw sequence. Apparently, there's a chainsaw sequence kicking around.
I've seen it. Yeah,
but they haven't. For some reason, it doesn't exist on home video anywhere, which is unfortunate. But the thing is, the Way of the Dragon. Like there was this big limited edition box set that Arrow did earlier this year, and then they're releasing them separately. And I do want to pick up Way of the Dragon on Blu-ray, mainly because on that Blu-ray is almost 4-hour documentary of all the dailies for the Game of Death.
Oh, wow.
It's almost 4 hours, like 3 hours and 45 minutes.
I'll have to watch that, yeah.
Bruce Lee fanatics, you got to get, if there's still any of those box sets left, which I doubt, they have released each and every one of the 5 Bruce Lee movies separately in limited edition 4K and Blu-ray sets. And if you're just fine just having the movies without the amazing features that James Flowers did an amazing job of rounding up, the Criterion set is great. It's not as good and in depth as the Arrow set, but it's still an amazing set.
Yeah, and and again, if you're a Bruce Lee fan and you're just looking for more of Bruce Lee, his daughter Shannon has done a phenomenal job with the Bruce Lee brand, and
there's a whole website you can buy merch.
She is absolutely amazing and really keeping both him and Brandon, their legacies alive. So, but yeah, and again, going forward in 2024, Chris, I know we've already talked. If you guys like Bruce Lee, we are going to be jumping into more Bruce Lee stuff, and Brandon Lee with The Crow coming up, and his birthday in February.
Right.
So, I could talk for hours and hours and hours about Bruce Lee, Enter the Dragon, and martial arts. So I'll let you have the mic for the last segment. Yeah,
the last segment, I won't take too long here, but another masterful 1973 movie. It's another revenge film. Another movie that Tarantino just idolized, but it just, to me, it doesn't get much... to me, the Kill Bill movies are good. Yeah. It's actually technically one movie, but they pale in comparison to Lady Snowblood, which in itself is a manga. There's a whole series of mangas about Lady Snowblood. But, I mean, you've got the amazing teaming of Miko Kaji. Now, Miko Kaji and Pam Grier, I always envisioned would be in a movie together. Like the two most badass female actresses. I mean, now, Miko Kaji wasn't as dynamic, as charismatic in a way, but she had her own aura about her. She was in these prison exploitation. There's a certain type of Japanese name they have for it, but it's an exploitation film series of female prisoner scorpion. There's like 4 of those movies with Miko Kaji. And then they wanted her for Lady Snowblood. And she was kind of reluctant. She goes, I'm really getting tired of doing these female exploitation films. But what enticed her was she was going to work again with Toshiya Fujita, who prominent in action films in Japanese at that time in the 60s and 70s. He actually did one of the female prisoner scorpion movies, and she liked working with him. So that, she decided to do it. But another thing is Miko Kaji was also a singer.
Oh, wow.
The songs you hear in Kill Bill, if the Flower of Carnage and stuff like that, she sang those songs. So she sings all of the songs in her movies.
Wow.
And she's got a beautiful voice, and it's just, to me, again, you look at Miko Kaji, she doesn't look like your typical badass, okay? Mm-hmm. Pam Grier, she oozes a badassness, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Miko Kaji, she's more meek, but I think she uses that to her advantage. Mm-hmm. And Lady Snowblood, she has an umbrella with a sword in it. Oh, that's her shtick.
Cool.
And they only made 2 of them. Unfortunately, the second Lady Snowblood movie, which was filmed like immediately afterwards, because this first Lady Snowblood movie was a hit, but it's just unfortunate we didn't have more Lady Snowblood movies at the time. You had the Zatoichi films, which is I think Bond is tied with the amount of movies in that franchise.
Yeah.
But Zatoichi had like 25 movies with the same actor. I wish they could have done that with Lady Snowblood, because Miko Kaji was perfect.
Yeah.
And she was just like the perfect, she's so iconic, again, without being like dynamic, if you will. She just had her own aura about her. Based on mangas, I highly recommend you watch Lady Snowblood. Again, 1973, amazing year for cinema, world cinema as well. Tukibuki. Tukibuki is just such an incredible film that was kind of just didn't go anywhere when it was made. It was an African film. Mambedi directed it, and somehow it was shown at the Cannes Film Festival and at the Moscow International Film Festival, but it really, movie a $30,000 budget, it just, no one really talked about it for a while. It was restored in 2008 by the World Cinema Foundation, which Scorsese personally funds. It's a World Cinema project that he has. It was ranked, it started getting a life of its own back in 2008 because you've heard of the Sight and Sound poll.
Yep.
It started getting in on the top 100 there, and it's going to keep climbing and climbing and climbing. Now, you got basically these two people. They're kind of con artists in a way. They just want to get the hell out of Dodge. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's kind of got that run-of-the-mill plot that the grass is always greener on the other side, but is it? Kind of plot that we've seen many, many times. But the way this was shot, it was so ahead of its time. And I think a lot of people they didn't know how to take it. And unfortunately, you don't hear a lot about African cinema.
Right.
It started to resurface mainly because of Martin Scorsese. He helps fund all this research. They dig up these movies out of obscurity. Again, where has this movie been?
Yeah.
I mean, literally,
yeah.
It's been buried in obscurity, and it's just come a life of its own. It's had a 4K restoration and everything like that, and the movie just seems to get more and more popular. I know Beyonce has started referencing it in some of her music. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Tuki Buki goes from being like unknown, and basically, in case you want to know what Tuki Buki is translated, it's basically the journey of the hyena. Again, it's not for all tastes because they literally show a calf getting slaughtered, but it's not just slaughtered. They cut the throat of the calf and they literally drain all the blood out of it, and it shows it. If you can get past that, there's some slaughter of other animals within the first 20 minutes. Trust me, if you can get past that 20 minutes, which is rough, it is like a traditional type of storyline after that, kind of. But the way it's presented, no one has seen anything like it before or since.
Wow.
Tuki Buki is just a masterpiece that was lost, but thankfully found. So that's 1973.
1973, yes.
You know, Wicker Man, Exorcist, and also Don't Look Now, and you know, all these great movies we've been talking about. And we were just skimming the surface. We could have easily talked about Torso,
sure.
Giallo cinema. I mean, there's a lot of Giallo cinema that Brian De Palma loved, and American cinema kind of copied, including John Carpenter. Mm-hmm. You know, it's just, we could go on and on about that.
We can go on and about, but it's, you know, what an incredible year for, you know, not just movies, but art and pop culture in general, as we talked about at the beginning of the show. But
1973. What was your favorite movie from 1973, or do you have a particular year that was your favorite? I mean, gosh, I could go on and on about different years. 1973, 50-year anniversary of a lot of these great films. Comment, give us some feedback, follow us on YouTube.
Absolutely. You know, I don't know if I have a favorite year. I just have favorite movies.
1974, we're probably going to round up movies that are turned 50 in that year, and maybe have some fun doing movies that are 100 years old and 70 years old. We're just going to have a lot of fun. We want to hear from you, though. What are some of your favorite movies? Comment below or send us a message. We're all over social media. Scared for Reels. I'm Chris O'Neill.
Adam Perry.
See you next time.